Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to create a small project where we are going to be able to create some articles by using ChatGPT, or actually just the ChatGPT's API. So we're going to create a Blazor server app, and that's actually just to make the UI a little bit more simple so we don't have to worry so much about that, but to do so we can focus on the code behind instead. So the final goal with this video is that we're going to be able to insert like a title on an article that we want to create, and then it should just create the article for us. So we would ask ChatGPT for some subheadlines to our title and then send a lot of requests back and forth to get the sections of the article. So first of all, let's go and create a new project, and we will just be choosing a normal Blazor server app and say next. We could call the project for something like automation app, and then we can just say next. For this project, we can just go and use the .NET 6 version. You could also go and use the .NET 7, but I'll go with the 6 version. We don't want to have any authentication, so we can just go and say create. So now that we have a clean project, we can go to the pages folder, and we will actually just go and create everything inside the index.razor file. So let's go and get rid of this. And we also want to create a code section for this page. And then let's go and create our first property. So we can go and say that we want to have a variable called title request. So this is going to be the title that we request to the ChatGPT's API. And to begin with, it should just be empty, because we're going to create an input field just like this, so that we have a input tag. And the type should just be some text, and we're going to bind the text to our title request variable. So now no matter what we type inside this input, it will always bind to this variable. We do also want to have a button. So I created this button where we have a on-click event listener on it, where we're going to trigger the get subheadlines method that we are going to create in just a moment. And the text on the button will be get subheadlines for the article. And the reason right now that we don't just say to ChatGPT that it should just give us the whole article is because that there is a limit on how much text that we can get back or that we can receive from the API. So the way we can get around this is just to take one section at a time. And of course, if you're going to publish the articles at any time, then you should really go and read them fully and go and edit them yourself, and also put maybe some illustration or some images inside the article to make it a little bit more interesting. We also need to remember that it's not every time that ChatGPT is correct. So if you get a whole article back and you don't read it, you might have many errors inside the article or something that is actually just not true. But from here on, I want to go and create the method for the get subheadlines. So we're going to create a public method that is async, and it's going to return a task, and the name should of course be get subheadlines. So now when we click this button, we're going to run this method. So now we need to actually create the call to the API, and I don't want to go so much in detail with it. I have other videos that shows how you connect to the API. So I'll just copy and paste and quickly explain what is happening. But actually before I do that, I want to create another method, which is actually just gonna be the API call. And I also want to put in a string, which should actually just be the text of the request that we sent. And this is just so that we can reuse the API call, because much of the code is the same except what we want to send of text to the API. So I'll just go and call it request text. But it will make more sense when I copy and paste in all the code to actually create the API call. So this is the whole API call, and you don't have to get overwhelmed by it. We will go through it line for line. So first line is just the endpoint that we want to target at the API, at OpenAI's API. So right now the endpoint is the version 1, and then /chat, and then /completions. The next thing is this message that we're going to create, and it's actually just an array of objects where we're going to create a new object inside that is going to have a role that is the user, and then we're going to have some content, and this is where we have the request text. So it's actually just the text that we send to ChatGPT, just like when you're inside the website and you send a message. So next up, we want to wrap this in a data variable, which is also a new object that is having a model and some messages, which is actually just the messages we have up here, and then some temperature. And as you can see right now, I'm using the GPT 3.5 model. Right now, I don't have the permission to go and use the ChatGPT 4 version, but maybe when you see this video, it will be normal at that time to use the version 4 or even higher version. But now when we have our object, the data we want to send to the API, we can go and serialize the object so that we're gonna make a JSON string that we can send to the API. And as you can see, we're going to use the JSON convert, and it's actually a class from the NuGet package newtonsoft.json. So we have to go and right click on the project and say manage NuGet packages, then go to browse, and then you want to search for this package, so newtonsoft.json, and we just want to install the newest version. So when that's done, we can go back to our index file. We should be able now to just go and say Alt Enter, and then you can see it want to use the newtonsoft.json library that we just installed. So when we click that, we can go to the top and we can see that we now use the newtonsoft.json library. We do also have some encoding here. We can just go and say Alt Enter on that and use the system.text library. And basically what we do here is just that we're going to create a new object of this string content so that we can go and put in our JSON string and the type we want to encode it to, and also say that it should be sent as JSON or handled as JSON, because that is the type of content that we're going to send with this request. We then want to go and create a new client, so a new HTTP client that we just call for client. So the client, we need to set the default request headers where we're going to add some authorization, and we need a bearer token to do this. So the token is actually coming from the website, the OpenAI's website. So if you just go to openai.com, we can go and log in, and where we want to go is the API. So we want to log into the API here, and I'm already logged in. So I can just click on my icon up here and say that I want to view the API keys. And you can see I already have two API keys called make articles and make articles 1. So we can just go and create a new one and call it make articles 2 and create the API key, and then go and copy this API key, and you are not able to see it again when you say done here. So I'll just go and copy it into our project. So here where it says token, I want to paste it in so that we have a bearer and then our API key. So now we can go and create the actual call to the API. So we say that we want to first of all await this call, and then we take our client and send a post async where we tell it what endpoint do we want to target. So that was the string up here. And then we want to put in the content, which is actually just the request to the API. And as you can see, because I copy and pasted this, I call it response to. We can just go and call it response, and also down here. So we are again going to await this, where we say that the response that we want to know what the content is, and then read it as a string async. So now we actually get the whole response as a string inside our response content. And just so that we can handle it a little bit better, we're going to use this J object. You can go and say Alt Enter and use the newtonsoft.json.link library. This are going to do so we are able to use the JSON object where we just can go and pass the response that we had. So it's just a string that we put in. And what it will do is to actually just go and create a new object from the string. So now we have our response in some type of JSON, and it's actually just a JSON object. So when we have that, we can go and target the choices inside the JSON object. We will go and take the index of 0, because in here we have the message and then we have the content, and then we're going to return the content as a string, which is where we get the response. And as you can see, the response don't have a var in front of it, and that's because we're going to create it. So copy the response text and go and create a new public string up here that is also empty. So now when we go and click the get subheadlines, we should call this API call method, And we should of course also go and await this. And then we want to go and put in the request string inside this API call. So it's really in here that we can create a string where we specify what we want to have in return from ChatGPT's API. So what I want to type in here is give me the subheadlines for the article, and then whatever we typed in that we want to create an article of, and then say and embed the subheadlines in a HTML list. And the reason we're going to embed it in a HTML list is because then we can go and actually handle the list that it give us in return. So we know when this API call has been executed, we can go and say on the next line that we actually want to go and display all the subheadlines so that we can see them before we actually create every section. So we know now that after this is called, then the response will be a HTML list with all the subheadlines included. So up in our properties, we're going to create a new property that is going to hold the list of the subheadlines, so we are able to go and display it up in our HTML. So I want to create a list that is only containing some strings, and let's call it HTML items because that is what it is. We could also call it subheadlines because that is also what it is, but I'll just call it HTML items. And next I want to go and display all the subheadlines that we get back from ChatGPT. So we should be able to just create a for each loop where we're going to loop through these HTML items, and then we get the individual items and just display them in a paragraph. So now that our HTML items is all set, we can go and create the actual list from the response that we get from the API. So in this case, I want to go and await a new method that we're going to create, and we actually just want to execute it like this, and I call it save HTML list. So we want to go and create that method. So we just create this public async task method, just like the others, call it save HTML list. And then again, I will just go and copy and paste some code in because I have a whole video just about this also, but I'll just go quickly and explain it also here. So now that I copy and pasted in, we are going to create a new HTML document class here, and this is actually also a library that we need to install. So let's go and right click our project again and say manage NuGet packages, and then we want to search for the HTML agility pack because this is the package that we want to install. And you can also just go and install the latest version. So we hit install, and when that's done, we can go back to our index page and again click on the HTML document and say all enter and say that we want to use the HTML agility pack. So the HTML agility pack just allows us to actually go and handle a string that we have with HTML and go and extract some information from the HTML document that we give to this HTML document class. So first of all, we create the new HTML document. We just call it HTML doc, and then we want to load some HTML into this HTML doc. And in this case, it can just be the response because we know that after this API call that the response is going to be an HTML list. So it's okay to use this. We could call it like a global variable that we have. You can then see we are going to create the HTML items list here, and this is just because I copy and pasted it. So I actually think we could get rid of this because we already have the list up here, or we actually need that back because we just want to go and delete this var in front. And the reason I don't want to delete this is because that every time we request a new title, then we get a new list, and we don't just want to add the new title. If we do it one time, then we add all these subheadlines to our HTML items. But if we're going to create another title, then the earlier list should of course be deleted, and that's why we're going to create a new instance of this HTML items, because it will just go and erase the old list. But after that, we're going to for each, and it's actually the HTML doc that we have here. We're going to for each, where we're going to target the document node and say that we want to select the nodes where we have our li tags. So it is just the list items inside our list that we're going to loop through and actually take one li tag at a time. And then we're going to add it to our HTML items list. We say add, and then we have the li tag and say that we want to extract the inner text from the li tag. So this is basically the way that we go from a string filled with some list items and the list to actually convert it over to our HTML items so that we have a list in C# that we can use. One last thing that we need inside our get subheadlines, we could also put it in here, but I'll just go and put it here, is that we want to say that the state has changed. And the only way we can say that the state has changed is by putting it inside an invoke async. And basically what this line will do is just to go and update the UI. Because if we don't do this, then there will be some items in the HTML list, but up here we will never get it displayed. So let's try to run this application and see if we get any errors or if it's working. So we do get one error. Let's try to see. And this is of course because I said that we should say response instead of response to, but let's go and say response to, because else we have two response variables and that's not good. So now you can see the red underline is gone. So let's go and try the application again. So as we can see, we do get the input field. We also get the button. So now we actually have to find some title for the article that we want to create. So now I just took an article and say top 5 healthy food to eat as a programmer. And let's try to see what we get of headlines, or to see if we actually get an error. So I click the button now and it will take a little while. So it took around 5-7 seconds. And now you can see we actually get all the subheadlines for an article. So what we're going to do now is to, in our program, say that we want to have this section, we want to have this section and this section. We then have a variable where we put it all together, and let's go and display it over in this side so that we get a full article. So back in our code, let's just go and actually close the application again. And just for some styling purpose, I want to go and create some diffs around this. We want to go and create a container. So this is just to set it up a little bit better. You don't have to understand Bootstrap, which is actually these classes. So basically what I did was that I created a container and then a row inside the container where we're going to have two columns. So we do have this section that is taking up half the space of the row, and we also go to create this column 6, which is taking up the other half of the screen. And it is in here that we want to go and display the actual article that we're going to create. So let's go down and create a new property that we're going to call full article. So again, just a public variable here that is the type of string called full article, and at first we just want to make it empty. So actually up in our HTML, let's go and create a new button where we say that it should go and create the full article. So let's go and say that we want to target a method called create full article, and let's also go and change the name of the button. So again, create full article. So now we should go down and create the actual method. So just make some space. Go and say that we want to create a public async that is returning a task, and we also want to call it create full article. So just like we for each the HTML items up here, we can actually go and copy this for each and put it inside our method. Just going to remove some things in here, also the tag. So what we could do now is to go and say that we want to target again the API call. So we want to call this API call and we want to say await. We can also go and remove that item here. So inside the API call, we are going to put our text that we want to send to ChatGPT. So in this case, I want to say, give me the section, and this is the section name that we're going to display. So it would just be the first section, and then say for the article, so that it have a little bit more context to go with, just so it also know the title of the actual article that it's going to create the section for. And then we want to say that it should embed it in HTML, where the subheadlines should be in a H3 tag and the text should be in a P tag, so a paragraph. And in this case, you could also go and say that it should add a class to the P tags. In this case, I just created one called article text, but we can just go and remove this so that it's simply just inside a P tag. So now when this request has been sent to the ChatGPT's API, we're going to get a response, and it will also just go and save it in the response. So we just reuse it, because in the first response that we get from the API call down here, we get the HTML list as a string. That is what we put inside the response. But in here, when this is called, the response will now be the section of the article that is embedded in HTML. So we're now able to actually say that our full article should be plus equal to the response, so that we actually just put this response and add it to the full article. And actually, also to be sure, we could also just go and say full article plus equal, and then actually add a break tag so that we get a new line, and we could maybe just put 2 in to be safe. And that's simply just to get the section underneath the other section, because when we loop this, it will just go and put all the sections together inside our full articles variable, and it will be with no spaces. It will of course be with some p tags around it, so it could divide it up when you display the whole article as HTML, but this is just to make sure that we have some line breaks between the sections. So what I want to do now is actually just to go, first of all, let's go and say in the beginning, when it creates the article, it should be empty. And I know we also do it up here, but if you go and create a new article, then it will go and erase the old article when we start creating a new article. And we could actually also go and say that it should be empty when we try to get these sub headlines already in that state. So the last thing we need here when we create the full article is this state has changed. We also need to call that, because else we cannot see the full article, or we cannot see what is the value of this full article inside the UI. So now we actually need to display this full article, and we would want to go and display it inside the right side of our page here. So inside the empty column 6 here. And because it is full HTML string that we get in return here for the full article, we don't want to show the HTML as a string. We actually want to mark it up. So we have to use this markup string. And that's actually just to display the real HTML instead of a string of some HTML tags. So let's try to run this and see if we forget anything, or if there's any errors. So this is our UI now. So now I just created this title for an article. It's called "The Fastest Animals on the Planet with 2 Legs." So what we want to go and do is to click on this get subheadlines for the article. And again, it took like 5 or 7 seconds to get these subheadlines for the article. So we can see here that we actually get some animals inside the subheadlines. And as you can see, the greyhound, I actually think you can see the fastest dog breed. So it actually don't care about this 2 legs that we put in. And that's what I mean by you have to really read what it puts at you, because it might not be what you wanted to do. So now that we have our sub headlines here, we can go and say create full article. Let's see if that works. So because we're going to create multiple calls to the API, it will take a little bit more time, because it will go and just ask for this one first, then this one, and then this one, and all the 5 subheadlines that we have in this article. You could also go and make it a little bit more nice to maybe have a loading icon so you can see that there is actually happening something. Also some try catch, but now you can see we actually get the article over here. So as you can see, it's not that we have some very big sections here. And it is really the downside right now that you cannot create, longer articles or sections without having some subheadlines. But I do believe that when we come to the next APIs that OpenAI is creating, that we will be able to create even bigger requests and get some more data than this. But I think this is a very nice way to actually use the ChatGPT's API. Imagine if you are a math teacher, you could actually go and use this to create some assignments. You could go in the code and just say that you want to have some specific assignments, and then you could actually go and print them out in a browser. But I think this is it for this video, and I hope you learned something, and else just go and have a nice day. Bye.